Welcome back to the shop, everybody. Nathan Wilson here, Driving Dreams Restorations. And so I'm in the process of making a new wiring harness for the 64 convertible. And a couple guys were over here. We were just laughing and joking about this. And so I thought I'd just share real quick with you guys. So here is one bucket or tote. I have two totes similar, like totally full of wires, right? So the last couple times I've done this, I was able to eliminate most of this stuff. All the old connectors, they end up being new weather pack style connectors. So you have all new wires, all new connectors, and actually you can eliminate a lot of this stuff. So the example that we were just talking about and laughing, whatever, and I was just going to share with you guys real quick. This isn't a super educational video, but it does kind of put some things in perspective and give you an idea of just how complicated these cars were and why sometimes it can be frustrating. So the example we were talking about, a guy calls and says, hey, I got no power at my passenger side window switch, right? And what could it be, right? So you would think on most cars, especially older cars, usually it would be kind of simple where you have power coming from a battery, goes to a fuse, from the fuse to the window switches, right? And you're like, oh, well, check your fuse, right? And then maybe check those couple of connections and you should have power there, right? So on a Lincoln, it's a little bit different. So just to give you an example, right? I'll try to keep this quick. So the power comes from the battery through the firewall. It's the big black wires, you know, that go feed most of the car, their power or whatever. So through the firewall, across the dash, and up to the amp meter, which we all know was a fire hazard and really should be kind of done away with. And it was kind of unnecessary. But anyway, so the power comes through the firewall, up to the amp meter, from the amp meter, back across to what do you call a circuit breaker, like one of these, and then from the circuit breaker back through the firewall and powers a relay, the window safety relay in this example. So now there's power to that relay. So how do you get it from there to the door, right? Power comes through the firewall, through the main source, across here to the neutral safety switch, from the neutral safety switch, which y'all probably are familiar with the neutral safety switch. That's so your car doesn't start or whatever, in the wrong, you can't start it in gear, stuff like that. From the neutral safety switch back across to another circuit breaker, from the circuit breaker up to the ignition, back across the dash to the ignition, from the ignition back across the dash, back through the firewall, and it's a trigger wire to that relay, right? So, and that's understandable, they kind of have it set up that way so that you have to have your ignition on for your windows to work. There's reasons for that. I've talked about it in other videos. It really kind of should be set up that way. So now you've gone back and forth all these times already. So that triggers this relay. So now the other power wire, or from the other side of that relay, that main power wire that came into it, now it's triggered, the relay's activated, power comes from that relay back through the firewall, back all the way across the dash, through the door, the driver's side door, and up to the master window switch. So from there, then it goes to another switch, the bypass switch there, that allows power to go to all your passenger side windows, which again, we understand that was so back in the day, your kids couldn't play with your windows. You could lock them out. They can't play with the windows. We still do that nowadays. So then it goes from that switch back through the driver's side door, back all the way across the dash, back through the passenger side door, and up to that window switch. So that's just one example, and it's probably more complicated than that. I didn't even mention the fuse panel and stuff like that, but it just gives you an idea of when somebody's like, well, man, why don't I have power to my window switch on my passenger side door? There's so much involved there, right? You've got the neutral safety switch, you've got the ignition, you've got the amp meter, you've got the window relay, you've all this shit, you've got these circuit breakers. All that stuff comes into play. And we all know the connections, one of the big problems is the actual connections themselves. If I can get this thing to focus, the way they connected to the window switch itself, it was these big rubber connections, and the spade terminals were inside there. And you can kind of see, I don't know if that's ever going to focus, but you can kind of see that started to burn up there. And so what happens is you get a loose connection or something, or a bad wire or whatever, or bad ground, something goes wrong, and it heats this up and it starts to melt this rubber here. And then the actual connection inside of there is able to get loose and move around. And so even when you take this connector and you stick it right up in there and it looks like it's on that window switch really good, a lot of times you actually don't have a good connection there. So you have bad connections, which is why I use, the newer style connectors and stuff like that, and make obviously a better connections and stuff. So you have all these points of connection. The window safety switch has a similar type ugly connector. All these different connections could be bad. All these different switches, the window switches, they get old. They get, everything's all old and rusty because the car is 50 some years old. It's understandable. All these connections, they can get loose over time. These breakers, they don't go bad that often, but the breaker could be bad, the neutral safety switch, the amp meter, the ignition, you could have some loose wires, or it's getting funny from being turned 5 million times over the years. The relay, that's a really common problem. You see how rusty these relays are, and these are outside the car, so sometimes they get wet and they get water on them. Again, the connections, these connections are just like those window connections. They're pretty shitty, and they don't always make a good connection when you think you got it pushed down right. This is the actual window safety relay here. So the goal is to eliminate as much of this shit as possible, but and put fresh new stuff so it'll look like this now, or something similar. But that just gives you guys an example. I just wanted to share it. Again, it's not super educational, but it kind of puts things into perspective. All those different things. So it's not that simple when you're like, oh, I don't have power in my passenger window. It could be any of that stuff. And then, here's a good example of what I talk about all the time. The worst possible thing, even worse than the bad connectors that they used, and maybe the more complex stuff that they did maybe wasn't necessary, having the relays outside the car, all that shit, right? Even worse is over the last 50 years, some guy in 1974 did some shit like this. That's the worst thing, and you guys have heard me say it 1,000 times. Find a car when you're first getting started. Hopefully you can find a car that hasn't been monkeyed with, hasn't been messed with. Some guy didn't go in there and splice a bunch of shit. Back in the 70s, he wanted to hook up a stereo, so he came in here somewhere, got into the wiring harness, found what he thought was a power wire, shit like that, or couldn't get a relay to work, said, fuck it, I don't need that relay, I'll just hardwire it in and splice the wires together, which I think actually somebody did here. Yeah, I was just, where'd that relay go? Yeah, somebody did that here. So they just spliced the two wires together. Fuck it, right? And so that adds a whole nother element, and it's even worse than trying to understand the car itself. I mean, I've got just books and books and books and pages of my own handwritten color coded wire diagrams and shit like that over the years. Even if you spend years and you get kind of familiar with how it's supposed to work, you have that problem of what somebody else did over the years. So like I've made plenty of videos about unwrapping these wiring harnesses. If you're actually restoring your car, even if you're not going to do all new wires and all new connectors and all that, go through, unwrap all this shit, because you guys have seen in my other videos, every single time I find something somewhere where somebody did like this, you can kind of tell is not factory. So somewhere back in the day, some guy, for some reason, he unwrapped this and he wrapped it back up with some electrical tape. So there's probably something in there that needs to be addressed. So go through all your wiring, go through all your connectors. If you can do new stuff and you can replace stuff, great. If not, at least inspect everything and find the shit like this that people did and try to correct it and make it better, and try to get it back right. But just wanted to share that with you guys, some of the, the complexity of this stuff. Hope you guys are all well and making it through this COVID stuff, and we'll see you next time.